Hey everybody, hope you guys are well. Welcome to the Morning Devo with Beau. It's going to be 1 Corinthians chapter 11 today as I rub my itchy eyes in the, allergy-ridden desert of Arizona. Super beautiful day, by the way, outside. Really nice. It's about 8:50 a.m. and it is a whopping 76 degrees, so beautiful. Gosh, just gorgeous out there right now. Absolutely cool. And it's a good day for some just nice chill jazz as we read through the Bible. And that's what we love to do on the morning devotion. A lot of times people will have their streams, their YouTube channels of biblical stuff, but it's kind of all over the place. And that's the difficult thing with kind of answering questions on the Bible is sometimes you need to actually read the entire Bible so you get kind of a big picture of why things are the way they are, why Jesus had to die, why he rose from the dead, what is the significance of that, what is the big problem in the world. All kinds of questions get answered if we just read through the biblical text. And that's why I love to do my devotions just by going through the Bible. After 1 Corinthians, I'll be in 2 Corinthians, if you could believe it. And then I'll go on to the next book, and then to the next book, and then to the next book. And then when I'm done, I'll go back and just do it all again. And man, it's amazing how every time you go through the Bible, something new will come up. So you really should not only just study the Bible, but you also should just read the Bible and go through it. And I hope to help you with that as I just go through it as well. So I use the New Living Translation. I have a wonderful friend with Wycliffe. She's a missionary out in the New Zealand, Papua New Guinea area. And she's done a lot of biblical translations, and she likes the New Living Translation for reading. And I find this a great translation for reading the Bible. So you don't really have to think too much about what it's all meaning because it's pretty clear. And that's the great thing about a modern translation, as opposed to, say, the Old King James version from 1611. I was not alive in 1611. And so that kind of English is very difficult for me to understand, especially growing up in Southern California. Okay, let's get into it. It says, I am so glad that you always keep me in your thoughts and that you are following the teaching I passed on to you. But there is one thing I want you to know. The head of every man is Christ. The head of a woman is man. And it says a man, and the head of every man is Christ or Messiah. And the head of woman is man, and the head of Christ or Messiah is God. A man dishonors his head if he covers his head while praying or prophesying. And it says, but a woman dishonors her head if she prays or prophesies without a covering on her head. For this is the same as shaving her head. Yes, if she refuses to wear a head covering, she should cut off all her hair. But since it is shameful for a woman to have her hair cut or her head shaved, she should be wearing a covering. A man should not wear anything on his head while worshiping, for a man is made in God's image and reflects God's glory, and a woman reflects man's glory. For the first man didn't come from woman, but the first woman came from man. And man was not made for woman, but woman was made for man. For this reason, and because the angels are watching, a woman should wear a covering over her head to show she is under authority. But among the Lord's people, women are not independent of men, and men are not independent of women. For although the first woman came from man, every other man is born from a woman, and everything comes from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it right for a woman to pray to God in public without covering her head? Isn't it obvious that it's disgraceful for a man to have long hair? And isn't long hair a woman's pride and joy, for it has been given to her as a covering? But if anyone wants to argue about this, I simply say we have no other customs than this, and neither do God's other churches. Now, Paul is definitely addressing something in these letters to the Corinthian church that is quite, if you will, personal. It's there are personal letters being written to Paul, and Paul is addressing kind of his answers to people in these books. The neat thing about 1 Corinthians is, as I mentioned probably early on in the devotion on this book, is just how personal it is. There's a lot of kind of going here and there, a lot of correction, a lot of instruction that Paul says, right? I'm giving you a lot of instructions of what I teach throughout the churches. And you almost wish you had every single letter that was written to Paul from the Corinth church, and every letter that Paul had, written to the Corinthian church, because they went back and forth, obviously. But, God has given us particular books and to have today, to be able to read and to be able to understand. And there's some big pictures here in this section that I find really fascinating. And it is, even with all these customs of head coverings and hair length and things like this and authority, the big picture seems to be authority. It seems to be the big picture of kind of that there is a role or an order to things. And within every society, this is true, by the way. No matter even what subculture you're in, there's a pecking order, if you will. Even when I was in junior high in a heavy metal culture, right? Heavy metal music culture. And we had our own kind of pecking order for how things went. Who was doing what, that kind of thing. It was kind of this order, this authoritative kind of thing, ranking that took place in our groups. Well, there's something that's created by God, and that is order. There is a function to our life. To the natural world, there's a function. When you study ants, the ants don't get mad at their rank, at where they're at or what they do. You find this in the animal kingdom, where they're not like, they're not, the dolphins are dolphins, the whales are whales. There's power plays, there's fighting sometimes within, there's, hey, I want to gain a better rank, so I'm going to fight you kind of thing. And there's these things, but we all realize at the end of the day that there becomes, even in the animal kingdom, a rank of authority. And sometimes there's a fight over who's going to be the top dog, so to speak. And at times, like in the ant kingdom, you just do it. And that's just your kind of lot. And you're okay with it. That's just what you do. You're not the queen. You're the other person. You're the soldier. So you just go ahead and go for it. The difficult thing in our lives as human beings is, am I okay with the rank or where I'm at or who I am? Or do I want to become, something else? Do I want to become all powerful? Do I want to become my own God? Do I want to usurp? Do I want to take over? You get the idea from this whole teaching, and there's a lot of stuff here to unpack for sure. And I would always say, hey, go to enduringword.com. My friend, go to Dave Guzik's website, Enduring Word, and just go through the commentary on 1 Corinthians 11 and read through it. And it'll help you kind of break down some of the facts of this chapter. But for the devotion purpose, I really am honing in on this idea of, am I willing to bear the image of God in my life? Like, just as in the image of God, there is a ranking in the unity of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and there is a submissiveness of Christ to the Father. Not my will, Jesus says, but yours be done. Coming underneath, volitionally, not by force, not coercion, but volitionally coming under the work of the Father. Jesus says, whatever the Father does, that I do. Right? I see my Father working, so I'm working. He comes underneath that. He doesn't want to usurp that authority. Am I wanting to usurp? And this is tough. This is something that our societies fight all the time. We're always usurping. We're always wanting to, go against. We're always wanting to fight. In Christianity, it's not about coercive submission. It's about a volitional submission to the glory of God. I need to submit to Christ. Am I willing to submit to the Messiah? Or am I not? He's not going to force, coerce, manipulate. Am I willing to come underneath? Am I willing to show my submission to Christ in a public way? And that's a tough question to kind of ask. Because who wants to, in a public setting, show that they're underneath someone? Usually, we want to show that we're free from any kind of authoritative figure. And again, that's why we kind of rebel and do the things we do when we're young, the anarchy thing. And, we want to break free from manipulative, coercive structures that force you into submission. But in Christianity, there should be a desire to want to bear the image of the Godhead. And so if within God, there is a submissiveness of the Son to the Father, then am I willing to bear that image in my life by my submission to Christ? So when it says wives submit to your husbands as unto the Lord, am I willing to, come underneath volitionally? Would you be able to come underneath your husband to submit as unto the Lord? Meaning it's unto the Lord. Why? Because the Lord does that. That's why. The Lord's not telling you to do anything he doesn't do, right? The Messiah is saying, hey, I do this. I come underneath. So are you willing to come underneath? That's something the Corinthian church is we're going to see as the book progresses, that they struggled with. They didn't want to have this kind of they didn't want to be a church that bears the image of God in this way of order and volitional submission. And I think this would be tough for many churches to affirm. Meaning, do many churches go, hey, I really want to bear the image of God in the way we are ordered? That's a tough thing, I think, for people to listen to or think through or submit to ultimately. But this is what this is talking about. I think there's something to be said this morning about my own personal ambition to maybe want to be at the top. That I don't really want to be humble or to humble myself, but I really want to dominate. And do you find that kind of personality in yourself as well? And maybe it's because we've been hurt by people that have been above us with authority. For instance, if your parents are an authoritative figure in your life, which they are, and they don't treat you very well, of course, coming underneath authority is going to be very difficult because you've been vulnerable with people in authority and they haven't treated you very well. And so that can be a problem. So you can see how this works, right? It can be very difficult to come underneath volitionally. Jesus is the best example of someone who was so vulnerable that he submitted himself to his Father in such a vulnerable way that he was actually crucified. I mean, talk about being vulnerable to the place of where you're submitting to the place of people inflicting pain on you, hurting you, torturing you. But you're submitting to the will of the Father, laying down your life, volitionally coming underneath. Jesus says, no one takes my life, but I lay it down. So, in 1 Corinthians 11, you see that Paul is trying to remedy something in the Corinthian church. And it has to do with ranking and order and authority. And he has to go back to God, right? That there's an order to even God, the Godhead. And there's an order to us as well on the planet. You might want to fight all you want. You might want to rebel all you want. But he says that there is an interconnectedness between the sexes even. That you can't just say, hey, men are what it's about or women are what it's about, because they all have an important role to play. And this is what's vital in what he's saying, is that we can't get prideful in where we're at, because we are all dependent on one another. And you see that that's what he's saying. A man is from a woman, and woman was taken out of man. And he gets into this, how you can't just say, like, I am a man, so I am the best. And you can't say, I am a woman, and I am the best. That we all have our part to play. We all have our position, if you will, on the baseball field. And everybody has an important position to play. It's just, if you are a first baseman and you're saying, hey, I'm bummed that the pitcher always has the ball in his hand and I want to be the pitcher, and you start complaining all the time because you want to be the pitcher, well then, yeah, you can go play pitcher, but you might not be good at it, and you leave first base open, right? So now the ball gets hit, and there's no first baseman. Why? Because you want to dominate the position of being a pitcher. And you see that this is what happens in the world, is where we move away from where we're supposed to be in our order with God, and we start dominating. And boy, is that what we see in this world, is constant domination. Is no one wants to walk humbly. Humility is, I think it was Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, that talked about humility as being one of the, I think he called it it was like a poison virtue. It was like a poisonous virtue to him. He was an atheist. He saw no purpose for humility, because in humility means vulnerability. And the dominant person, the one who's stronger, will dominate the one who is weaker. And so as an atheist, he saw humility as being a poisonous virtue. But in Christianity, humility is the pathway, right, to salvation. Right? God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. So some things to really think about and work on today. Now it says, but in the following instructions I cannot praise you, for it sounds as if more harm than good is done when you meet together, dominating one another, power plays over one another. First, I hear of these divisions among you when you meet as a church, and to some extent I believe it. But of course, there must be divisions among you so that you who have God's approval will be recognized. Notice he says, but of course, there must be divisions among you so that you who have God's approval will be recognized. You get the idea that this Corinth church was really struggling with, hey, I'm very important. I'm very important. No, I'm very important. And when you meet together, you are not really interested in the Lord's Supper, for some of you are hungry to eat your own meal without sharing with others. And as a result, some go hungry while others get drunk. What? Don't you have your own homes for eating and drinking, or do you really want to disgrace God's church and shame the poor? This is the idea throughout the book of Corinth, is shaming the church of God, right? Putting the church of God in a situation where it's no longer seen as a good thing, but it's seen as a corrupt thing. And it says, what am I supposed to say? Do you want me to praise you? Well, I certainly will not praise you for this. We can't just sit around and be like, oh, everything's great, everything's great, everything's great, right? Oh, it's so good. No, look at what you're doing. You're going to the church, the assembly, you're getting together with everybody. You guys are going to have communion, but people are rushing to the table to get all the food first. And so there's stragglers that are left behind, the weak. And those ones don't get anything. And even though it's a supper, it's a time for not only communion, but a time like a potluck, we would say, but a time to get together and gather together as a church. But you're just, you see people misusing this for their own desires. And Paul says, I cannot commend you for this kind of behavior, right? Constant getting over on one another, constant living in your flesh, caring about fleshly food instead of the spiritual things. Doesn't that sound like us as human beings? Constantly wanting to dominate, constantly wanting to get more material goods, constantly not thinking about spiritual goods, but material goods. What do I want? I want more. I want more. Desires, wishes, wants, constant desires, constant more. It just keeps going on, right? Not caring about other people, not thinking about other people, not discerning where other people are at, but just really seeking ourselves, becoming self-absorbed. And he says, for I will pass on to you what I received from the Lord himself. On the night when he was betrayed, the Lord Jesus took bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and said, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And in the same way, he took the cup of wine after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant between God and his people, an agreement confirmed with my blood. Do this in remembrance of me as often as you drink it. Every time you eat this bread and drink this cup, you are announcing the Lord's death until he comes again. So anyone who eats this bread or drinks this cup of the Lord's unworthily, that's a hard word, unworthily, is guilty of sinning against the body and blood of the Lord. That is why you should examine yourself before eating the bread and drinking the cup. For if you eat the bread or drink the cup without honoring the body of Messiah, you are eating and drinking God's judgment upon yourself. Is really communion about honoring God, or is it really about going to the feast and eating all the food? The Passover meals and stuff like that. Is it about really eating the chicken or eating the whatever's brought, or are you really wanting to honor the Lord? And the idea is that there is a judgment. God is seeing, God watches, God knows our heart. We are going to be accountable to him for what we do. And this is so important. It is the Lord's church. It's not Paul's church. It's not, Peter's church. It's not Apollos' church. It's the Lord's church. And so Paul has to remind them that when you do this in an unworthy manner, the Lord takes note of that, and you will be judged by that. He says that's why many of you are sick and weak, and some have even died. What is he saying? He's saying that Jesus, the Messiah, judges people. He judges even his church. And you go, what? Man, that doesn't sound really that nice. Gosh, I don't know if I like that. Well, think about what you're asking for then. You're asking for a God who is indifferent to us, who doesn't care. the way we act or the way we behave. And then that's a made-up God. That's a fairy tale. You can call it spiritual, being spiritual, you can call it whatever you want. But it's not the God of the Bible. The God of the Bible is the God who dictated the book of Numbers, and that's a book of accountability in the Torah. And that same God is the God of accountability in the New Testament in the church of the Messiah. Same God. So when Jesus is speaking in the book of Revelation to the 7 churches, you can see there's a lot of correction there for things that have gone astray. Because there's an accountability that we have. And when we take the Passover celebration, which is communion, and we take that cup of redemption, that cup that commemorates the redeeming work of Jesus, and we don't honor Jesus in it, then what we are doing is, in a sense, an idolatrous act. Instead of coming in an honorable way before a God, the God, who's laid down his life and redeemed us and is our Passover lamb, we instead have made up something in our brain of why we're taking communion. And that is an idolatry. And there's only, and that brings forth judgment, because I'm not doing what is intended for communion. You know, if you don't use things in the right way, there is a automatic judgment. You know, if I use a TV for a hammer, there's going to be a problem, because a TV is not intended to be a hammer, to strike a nail. But if I use it as a hammer, there's going to be a consequence for the action. And so if I don't enter into communion celebration in an honorable way, I am using it not the way it was intended. And therefore, I'm going to bring about a judgment, a consequence on my own head, because I am under the authority of Messiah. Man, that is maybe much different than what a lot of people want out of a church. You know, what a lot of people want out of a church is just, hey, let's be friends. Let's just have family. Let's have, a mommy and me class. Let's have this. Let's have great children's ministry. Let's have this. It's almost like, some kind of country club instead of really the church of the living God. So it says, so my dear brothers, or it says, but if we would examine ourselves, we would not be judged by God in this way. Yet when we are judged by the Lord, we are being disciplined so that we will not be condemned along with the world. God's judgment on us is good. Why? Because so that we won't be condemned with the world. His discipline is the right thing for us, right? Being judged by the Lord. This is talking about the church. This isn't talking about those outside the church. It's talking about those within the church. And so, there's a seriousness to the body of Christ. A seriousness, because we're all under the authority of the Messiah. Man, I bet you the Corinthian church at this point was just like, whoa, do I really want to be? Do I really want to be in there? Oh, man. Michael says the church of name it and claim it and blab it and grab it is a myth. And that is true. It is a myth. This is the real church in 1 Corinthians. I mean, this is real church teaching going on, right? And says, so my dear brothers and sisters, when you gather for the Lord's Supper, wait for each other. If you are really hungry, eat at home, so you won't bring judgment upon yourself when you meet together. I'll give you instructions about the other matters when I arrive. So you get the idea that Paul has a lot to say to them. A lot to say about everything from the head coverings going on in Corinth to what it meant to be covered with head coverings, the idea of ranking, position, role, these kind of things, how it relates to the image of God, the bearing the Godhead, how it relates to how we treat one another in the church, how it relates to how we submit to one another within the church. and obviously how we treat each other. And he gives that example, of course, what's going on in these love feasts in the early church, where they would take communion, have a meal, and all that. He says, man, just eat at home. Don't go to the church and just, take over, dominate. So, man, a really amazing chapter. It's one of those ones where you read and you kind of go, I don't quite get it. But when you just take the big pictures in it, you go, man, this is really powerful and convicting for our hearts. So when we pray, we should ask God to help us with volitionally submitting, volitionally coming underneath, especially Christ, but even each other, learning how to surrender, learning how to submit so that the church is seen in a good light, and that we would walk honorably with one another, caring for one another, honoring Christ when it comes to communion. We have communion this Sunday. What is in my heart when I'm partaking of communion? Am I honoring Christ, or am I thinking of something else? Is this an idol? Am I doing something with a weird concept in my mind? I'm not really focused on who God is. And I'm not thinking about God in the right way. That God is a God of accountability. And even us Christians will be accountable. So we need God to help us with these things and to open up our eyes to who the Messiah is, so that we don't have a false Messiah, right? Someone who's just this Jesus that's made up in my brain, that would never criticize me, never say like, Beau, you're doing wrong, or Beau, get it together, No, Jesus would say those things, and you see it throughout the scriptures. So may God help us today, right, brothers and sisters? Okay, 1 Corinthians chapter 11 in the books. It's a good one to think about today. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.